So today's agenda is we're going to talk about preparing for year-end in Sage 100, discuss the calendar year-end functions, and talk about processing period and year-end for normal fiscal periods, some post-year-end considerations, and then talk about the year-end resources that are available to you to assist you with year-end. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So as Danica mentioned, everyone's phone is muted. So as I go through the presentation, if you have questions, go ahead and jot them down. When we get to the end, we'll be opening up the phones to answer questions. So preparing for year-end. This is always a good time to think about your disaster recovery plan. Make sure that you have backups that are being scheduled on a regular basis, and if you're not sure what those are, check with your IT folks that the Sage database is being backed up. Make sure you have a backup off-premise, so if something were to happen, a fire or something in the building getting ruined, that you have a backup of your database. And one of the most important things about a backup is periodically testing to make sure you can restore from a backup. I think many of you have probably heard of ransomware, and we've actually had several Sage 100 customers being hit with ransomware. What it does is it actually manipulates your file structure so that the program becomes unusable, and you either have to pay the ransom or have a good backup that you can restore back to. And we've had a few customers that have had to do this, so you do want to make sure that your backups are restorable, because if you run into a situation where you have to restore, obviously you need to have a good backup and know that that hopefully is recent so that you don't lose days worth of work. So that ransomware threat is real, so be aware of it and just make sure that you have backups. As part of your period end processing, you want to determine a cutoff date in each module. You can speak with your accounting firm to determine what that cutoff date might be. Oftentimes for accounts payable, people will leave the month open for a couple of days or for a week or 2 weeks to make sure that they get all the AP invoices in and post them to the date where the expense was incurred. So determine what that cutoff date is. If you're using the paperless office module, verify that it's been set up to collect period end reports. For anyone not familiar with paperless office, the paperless office module allows you to send journals, registers, reports, period end reports to PDF files, and then there's a module that indexes them so that you could go in and look at all of your period end reports for example, calendar year ending December 31st, and you would have those all as PDF files instead of having to print hard copies. If you're not familiar with paperless office, definitely reach out to us because it's a great feature and it saves lots of paper. The other thing at the end of your fiscal year, so if your fiscal year happens to be your calendar year, you would want to go ahead and set up your next fiscal year. So if you're going to be starting to post into 2017, you'd want to make sure that 2017 has been created, and that gets created in the general ledger in the setup folder. If this is not the end of your fiscal year, then obviously you would do that later on whenever your fiscal year end is. Another part of doing the year end is you want to verify the setup options in your modules. For example, history retention. As part of the year-end function in all of the modules where you run a period end, it will purge history. So you want to check in your accounts payable parameters, your general ledger parameters, your accounts receivable, and validate how many years of history you're keeping. So if you're only set to keep 5 years of history and you're about to go into your 7th year, it's going to drop off one of your old years. So you want to be aware if history is going to be purged at year-end. If you have history that you want to save, what you may want to do is create a copy of your company, an archive company, that you could say this is history through such and such date, and then as part of your year-end processing, you may actually want to purge history just to save on room, and if you have performance issues, if things are going slow because it's chugging through 10 years worth of data, you may want to put that history into another company. Also in your options is where it has set your current period and your current fiscal year. And if you're producing 1099s, it will have what your 1099 calendar year is. In the general ledger options, there are some parameter options in there about resetting your journal number. So general journals will start, 1 and then increment. There's some settings in there that you can reset your general ledger journals at year end or you can say never reset. So if it is set at year end, just be aware that starting 2017, your journal entries are going to start with number 1 again if your general ledger options are set up to reset at the end of the year. Another important thing about the general ledger options is there is a flag on the budget tab that says copy actual to default budget at year end. And what that means is if you are using budgets in the general ledger module, that your actual numbers from last year, from 2016, can roll over and become your budget for your 2017 year. That's a great feature. One thing you want to be aware of, though, is if you run the year-end process more than once, so let's say you close the general ledger, your auditor comes back to you and says, oh, I've got some more adjusting entries. You open up the general ledger to put those entries in and then reclose it again, that if this flag is turned on, you may overwrite the budgets that you just put in because you're running the year-end function again, and it looks at the actuals and makes that your default budget. So just be aware of that flag, especially if you have to run the year-end process in the general ledger more than once. I mentioned earlier about creating a copy of your live company. If you have the payroll module, it is critical that you create a copy of your live company, at least the payroll module and the GL, at year end so that you have a copy of the numbers at that point in time. When you run the payroll year end, it's actually going to clear out your employee quarter to date and year to date values. So you want to make sure you have a backup so you'll have that information for your W-2s and for your ACA reporting. If you're going to be purging history, we would recommend that you make a copy. A copy is different than a backup. A backup is some external source. This is actually making a new company in Sage that would just be a replica of your existing company. And the advantage of doing it as a copy is a user can just switch companies. So if I have a copy of my live company and I need to see what year-end information was for a given employee, I can just switch companies and see that information rather than having to restore to a backup tape. If you're going to be making a copy of your company, you want to make sure you have enough disk space on your server to do that. If you have any questions or need help creating a copy of your company, you can contact your RKL consultant or you can contact RKL support. Calendar year versus fiscal year. The calendar year end has specific tasks related to producing your W-2s and your 1099s. The fiscal year end is pretty much the same process as a period end with a few additional considerations. So when you do a fiscal year end, you're going to do all the same things that you would do at a period end, but there's a couple extra things like creating the new fiscal year, validating what history is going to be purged, validating those settings such as those GL journal resets and that budget copy feature. And for the general ledger, when you run the year-end function, your income and expense accounts are going to roll into retained earnings. Regarding the calendar year end, which again is doing your W-2s and your 1099s, you will need to make sure that you have installed the 2016 IRD and the year-end e-filing Atrix update. So every year the IRS is going to have new forms for your 1099s and your reporting and your W-2s. So to be compliant so that you can go to those forms, you'll need to make sure that this update gets applied to your system. Before installing the IRD, you want to validate that your Sage 100 system and any third-party applications that you might have are compatible. Supported versions of Sage 100 are version 2017, which was just released, I believe, last month, 2016 update number 1, 2015 update 3, and 2014 update 7. Sage is no longer supporting version 2013 or lower. So if you are on a version prior to 2014, then you would either need to go ahead and update your system, or you'll just have to produce your W-2s and 1099s outside of Sage. So you could talk to your accounting firm and see if there's something they can do there, or type them up manually. Next year, Sage will no longer be supporting 2014. So if you were on 2014, you have a full year to schedule an upgrade to get yourself on a updated version. So next year, again, 2014 will not be supported, so you'll want to make sure before next year that you get updated. If you need any assistance updating the IRD or updating to a supported release, you can contact RKL support. The best way to reach our support department is via email. This time of year especially, our support group is on the phone a lot. So they do have a phone number, but it may be tied up. So the best bet is to send an email to support@rklesolutions.com. If you're not sure what version you're on, if you go into Sage and go to Help and go to About Sage 100, that will show you the version number. And the screenshot I have here, you can see that it has version 2014, and then next to it in parentheses it has 5.10.5. That third number in there, that 0.5, is telling you the service pack update. So in this example, on 2014, I need to be at least on update 7, so I would need to be on 5.10.7. So this version that I'm showing you is not compatible, so I would need to apply service pack number 7 to be on a compatible release. But this just kind of shows you how to read your release number. For 1099s, in preparation for producing your 1099s, you want to make sure that your Atrix is up to date and that you have access to get into Atrix. The access to the 1099s and also the W-2s is a workstation setup that needs to get installed on each workstation that will actually be producing the 1099. So not every user will have access to this. To find out if you have access, on your Accounts Payable menu, go ahead to Reports and go to Form 1099 E-Filing and Reporting. If you get an error message that says that it's not installed, then give us a call and we can do a workstation setup and get that installed for you. And getting that installed probably takes like 10 minutes. It's not that big of a challenge to do that piece there. The 1099s are processed through a third-party product called Atrix. To test Atrix before year-end, again, you're going to go in from the menu option, and if you are able to access it, you may get a message that says updates need to be applied. Go ahead and just have it run the updates, because sometimes certain states will have changes to their forms for year-end. A wizard will walk you through the process, and it will pull data from Sage 100 into Atrix. When you launch Atrix, there is an option to do a test drive, and I put a screenshot on this slide here where it says 1099 Setup Wizard, and hopefully you can read the slide okay. But it gives you an option that says, I want to do a test drive with just my first 25 employees, I want to do a test drive with all my employees, or I want to go ahead and just start processing my 1099s. So, after this call, if you guys want to go in and do a test drive just to see how this works, you can do that. You don't have to wait until the end of the year to make sure your Atrix setup is all set to go. Atrix will do the e-filing for you, but if you want to print your own forms, you can do that for free, but you will want to validate that you have purchased the correct forms. Atrix will only support printing W-2s and 1099s as 4 per page. They no longer support the 2 per page. If you're not sure, you can order the forms directly from Sage. You can go to their website and order them, or you can call this 800 number listed here on this slide. If you decide that you want to purchase your forms locally, you could still go to the Sage website just to validate what the forms need to look like, just to make sure that you order the correct ones. And on the Sage website, they actually have additional information about exactly what forms that you need to purchase. The second screenshot at the bottom of the screen just kind of shows you what the wizard does. So when you go through the wizard, it will actually bring up all your vendors that are going to be getting a 1099, and it will walk you through validating the information. So where I have a little red square there and it says instructions will appear, hit next after following each instruction, it will tell you validate your employee identification numbers, validate the company name, validate the address, validate the income listed in each of the boxes on the 1099s. And then there's a next button again that will just walk you through that wizard. So again, this is the preparation for the 1099s, and you can go ahead and do that right after this call if you want to. When it comes time to actually process your 1099s, after your last check run for 2016, you'll want to reconcile and validate your 1099 amounts. The best way to do that is to print the payment history report. If you need to make any corrections, if you go to the vendor master file and go to where the 1099 information is set up, you'll see a button there, and you can actually, from the vendor, see the 1099 boxes, and you can actually make edits. That's also helpful for anyone that may have just gone live on Sage 100 this year, and perhaps you went live mid-year and you do not have all your 1099 information in Sage. You could come in there and just edit the amounts in from your legacy system so that you have a corrected 1099 number. So you can edit that right on the vendor master file. You'll want to retain any supporting documentation that backs up your 1099 numbers, especially if you're editing those numbers. So you may want to save that payment history report and also probably the accounts payable trial balance. I would recommend that you save those to Paperless Office instead of just having the paper version. If you save them as a PDF, then you can access them if you need that backup. Again, we recommend that you do a backup so that you have all this 1099 information at this point in time once you've finalized all those numbers. Once you're ready to go, you would go ahead and launch the 1099 e-filing and reporting, and then follow the prompts. And when you get to the end of the prompts, you'll come up with what you see here in the screenshots below, is Atrix will tell you what they would charge you if you want them to e-file for you. So in this example here, I only have 3 vendors that need a 1099. The price per recipient is $1.95, so it's $5.85 for the e-filing, and then there is a minimum cost of $25 as well. So depending on how many 1099s you need, it may or may not be cost effective to just have Atrix do the e-filing for you. The screenshot on the right-hand side of the screen shows you that you do have the option to print the 1099s yourself. And if you do print them yourself, then it is free and there's no charge. You could also do some combination of that. If you want to print the 1099s, but you want Atrix to do the federal filing for you for the reporting, you could do that. So when you get to this last screen, you've got some options. You can decide what options you want, and it will tell you your amount that you owe. And again, you do have the option for printing those for free as well if you'd like. But with the e-filing, it's probably easier to just have Atrix do it for you. Payroll is very similar to the 1099s. There was a webinar last week specifically on payroll, so I won't go into as much detail, but just kind of go through the highlights. For payroll, the same applies as to the supported release. In order to install the Sage IRD, you need to be on 2014 or higher. And if you're on the version 2014, you need to have Service Pack 7 installed. You want to make sure that your payroll options are set to retain perpetual history. You definitely want to copy your live company to a payroll backup company that you can use to do your W-2s. When the payroll year-end is performed, again, the employee quarter-to-date and year-to-date values will be set to 0. You want to validate your requirements around ACA, the Affordable Care Act. When you actually do your year-end processing, after you've cleared out the payroll by doing the payroll year-end, you'll then need to load your 2017 tax tables before you run your first 2017 payroll. Processing year-end. So I've kind of covered the calendar piece of it, which is the W-2s and the 1099s. Regarding all the rest of the stuff that needs to get done, this checklist is actually a month-end or a year-end checklist. Again, for the most part, your fiscal year-end is the same as a regular period close with the addition of the fact that the system is going to purge history. So you want to make sure you know what those history settings are. So this chart here is kind of my cheat sheet for doing a period end close. It is in the order that you should close the modules. The second column where it says PE indicates if in that module there is actually a period end function that needs to be performed. So the first thing on the list is to make sure that all your journals and registers have been posted in all modules. You want to make sure especially that that daily transaction journal in the general ledger has been posted so that everything is posted all the way through to general ledger. You then want to reconcile your subsidiary modules to the general ledger. So validate AR, AP, inventory, all match GL. I'm going to switch slides for a second here. So for the reconciliation, there are recommended reports in each module. The purchase order module has a purchases clearing report, which will show you any purchase orders that have been received and not yet invoiced, which should tie to your purchases clearing account in the general ledger. The important thing to note about the purchases clearing report is it is a perpetual report. You cannot run it with a cutoff date. So if possible, you want to try to run that at the very end of the month. If you need to run it, say on January 5th, and you've already done receipts in the new year, then just make sure that when you're comparing it to the general ledger, that you're going to just look at the January 5th general ledger balance. So the purchases clearing report will tie to the general ledger at a given time, but you cannot run it with a cutoff date. So if you miss running it at the end of the month, then you'll just have to tie out to wherever you are today. The inventory module, AR module, and AP module all have a trial balance report. The trial balance report should always tie to the general ledger because that report uses the posting date. The second report that I usually recommend that you run is in the inventory module, the valuation report, and then for AR and AP, the aging reports. It is possible that those reports may not tie to the general ledger because those are not run based on your posting date. They're based on your invoice date. So if those reports are different, if you run an AR aging report and an AR trial balance, then oftentimes it just means that a date of the invoice was different than the date it got posted to the general ledger. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it can alert you if somebody accidentally dated something incorrect, which happens a lot at the beginning of a new year. So for example, I'm starting to put transactions in for January 2017, and maybe I'm backdating something in December, and I accidentally type in December 2017, or the other way around, I put in January 2016. So if those reports don't tie, oftentimes it means that a invoice date is not the same as the period it got posted into. So it's not wrong, but just be aware of what the difference is between those reports. So this is a list of the recommended reconciliations that you should do every single month, but specifically at a year end. You also want to validate with your accountant if there's any additional reconciliations that may be needed for your company. If I go back to my checklist, so this was number 2, that I'm going to reconcile everything to the general ledger. And then as I go through the modules, some of the modules have a period end routine and some don't. So bill of materials, there is no actual period end function. You just want to make sure that everything's been posted. So if you're using production entry, just make sure that's posted all the way through to the general ledger. The work order module, the job ops module, and the manufacturing modules, you're just going to reconcile your WIP, your work in process, to your general ledger, print any reports for the period or the year that you need. There is no formal closing period, but there may be certain reports that you want to run at the end of the month or the year. The PO module, we already talked about the PO clearing report. You want to make sure that that ties out to your general ledger, run any reports that you need, and then when you close the PO module, it will advance the period to the next period, and it will purge any purchase order history that you have based on your parameter settings. The sales order module, you want to print any month-end or year-end reports that you want to keep. When you run the period end processing, again, it's going to purge history based on your sales order options, and it will advance you to the next period. The inventory module, if you're using FIFO, LIFO, serialized, or lot inventory, you may have negative tiers in your inventory, which happens if you remove an item from inventory before you have recorded the receipt transaction. So as part of your month-end procedure, you want to do your negative tier adjustments to balance that inventory out. Oftentimes people like to perform a physical inventory count at the end of the month or the end of the quarter or at the end of the year. If you need help doing a physical inventory count, if that's something you've not done before, feel free to reach out to us and we can give you more information on how to do that. The most important thing I'll tell you on the physical inventory account is do not update your physical inventory counts until you have reviewed the variance journal. There is a report that will spit out that will show you what your change in inventory value is, and if it says your inventory value is going to change by $1 million, you probably do not want to update that until you find out what happened. The inventory physical count can be a little bit tricky if you don't understand what it's doing. So just most important, make sure you review carefully what is actually going to post before you update your physical counts. The inventory module, you want to reconcile that to your general ledger, print any period end or year-end reports, and when you run the period end processing, again, it's going to purge any history based on your options, and it will advance you to the next period. The MRP module does not have a period end function. It's only a year-end function that it would be performed once a year, and it would close out the previous year's projected demand. The payroll module is not based on fiscal periods and year. The payroll module is based on a calendar, quarter, and year, so those would follow that calendar, not necessarily your fiscal calendar. Accounts receivable has a few functions in there depending on what you're using. You have the ability to compute finance charges, to print customer statements. You can calculate and validate your commissions if you're using commissions. You would then again reconcile your AR, run reports, run your period end processing, which again is going to purge history based on your options. And if you have any temporary customers set up, those potentially would get purged as well during your period end processing. Accounts payable, same thing. You're going to do your reconciliation, run reports. Job cost is going to be pretty much the same as that. The bank module doesn't have a period end routine, but basically the bank module is used to reconcile against your bank statements. The key thing to remember on the bank reconciliation module is that when you close out your bank rec, it actually does purge the data for that, all those checks that are being cleared get purged out of the bank module. At this time, the bank module does not have any history. So it's really just a holding bin to hold all the checks that you've written, all the deposits that you've done, any bank transfers or miscellaneous things. And then when you go and you reconcile against your bank statement and you've matched everything up, it then purges those transactions. So the bank reconciliation module is intended to just hold outstanding transactions. With that said, before you close out each bank rec, I would recommend you send the information to Paperless Office so that you'd have a list in Paperless Office of all of the checks that got cleared during that period. And then the last module that gets closed out is the general ledger. I want to make sure that everything else is posted all the way through. The general ledger does not need to be closed right at the end of the month. Oftentimes people will keep that open so that they can put in adjusting entries. At the year-end time, your income and expense accounts will get rolled into your retained earnings, and then your balance forwards will move forward. If you close out the general ledger and then 4 months later your accountant comes back to you and says, oh, we've got some adjusting entries, you do have the ability to reopen the GL, put in your adjusting entries, and then reclose it and bring it back up to your current period. If you do that, again, you do want to be careful about that budget flag in the GL options. So this is the order that you should close your modules and kind of a high level running through what you would do in each of those. And again, the big thing you want to be careful about is when you're at a year end, it is going to purge history based on your settings. So I didn't go into a ton of detail on each of those modules because obviously we'd probably need another 3 hours if we were going to go through each module one by one in all of the steps involved. So I want to point you in the right direction of getting additional help on this. The Sage Online help is actually really great. Any place in Sage where you see a question mark icon will allow you to access the online help. So here I've shown you a screenshot of once you get into that help, on the left-hand panel where you see contents, index, and search, if you type in the word checklists on the index, it will actually bring up a period end checklist for each module. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll notice it says AR period end processing checklist, and it's going to walk you through the steps for doing the period end closing in AR. You'll notice also there's hyperlinks in here. So on step number 3 where it says perform finance charge calculation, if you click on that, it will bring you into additional detail about how to process finance charges. So these period end checklists are great to take you through each module in a little bit more detail. And again, those are accessed anywhere you access help online from within the Sage module. Some additional considerations for your year end. After you've closed out your fiscal year, you want to go into each module and just verify that it advanced to the correct fiscal period and year. And there's a screenshot at the bottom where you can see that my accounts payable is now set to current fiscal year 2017, and my current period is 1. Below that, you'll see the 1099 information. You'll notice that my 1099 calendar year has moved to the 2017, so that when I start cutting checks in my new year, that information will get captured in the 2017 calendar year. For the payroll module, you want to verify, again, that you're in the correct calendar year. Also, you want to take a look at your employer contributions and any employee deductions that may have changed in the new year. So oftentimes at the beginning of a new year, medical benefits, things like that have changed. Just go through your employer and employee benefits, deductions, contributions, and just validate that those are all correct if anything has changed in the new year. You also want to maybe take a look at your vacation and sick accruals in case those are based on the calendar year. At year end is also a great time to make a backup of your entire Mass 90 directory. Mark it, this is year ending December 31st, 2016, and put that in an off-site place and have that be a backup that is not going to get overwritten. Additional year-end resources. So if you need assistance, you can contact RKL support at support@rklesolutions.com. You can again reference the online help. And then Sage City, I'm not sure if all of you are members of Sage City. Sage City is an online web community for Sage users, and it's for users, consultants, and you can go on there and post questions and get help from other users on Sage 100 requirements that you may have. In addition to that, they put together a great year-end center dashboard. So I've got a screenshot of it here, and you can see that in the lower right-hand corner, they actually have links to the IRS, links to information about the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. So if there's additional information that you need about year-end, if you come here, you can click on Sage 100. There are videos, tutorials, checklists, additional information that you may need. You can also drill down and find out exactly, for example, what 1099 or W-2 forms that you need. So it is a great resource to look up anything year-end related and even beyond that. So there's no charge to join this community. I highly recommend that anybody on here go ahead and take a look at that. So that wraps up my presentation.